I stood in the center of the mansion's marble foyer, holding a glass I wasn't allowed to set down, while the woman sleeping with my husband introduced herself to the room as family. Laughter rippled politely around us. Crystal chandeliers burned overhead. The walls were lined with portraits of men who never imagined women like me, or her, deciding their legacy. She smiled as she spoke, slow and deliberate, every word sharpened for display. "So," she said loudly, eyes flicking over my dress with practiced disdain, "you're the one living here now?" The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was expectant, because what no one knew, what she especially didn't know, was that this house, this mansion she was parading through like a prize she'd already won, had never belonged to my husband. And it certainly didn't belong to her. At the far end of the room, my father-in-law set down his glass and smiled. By the time I realized I was the only person in the room without a place to sit, it was already too late to excuse myself gracefully. The armchairs were full. The long velvet sofa was occupied by relatives who smiled without warning. Even the small chaise near the window, usually ignored, had been claimed. I stood there with my wine glass like an accessory no one had planned for, trying not to shift my weight too obviously as conversation rearranged itself around me. This was not my family party. Not really. It was being hosted in the DeLuca mansion. The mansion, as everyone in town called it. An estate that sat behind iron gates and manicured hedges, its name whispered with equal parts admiration and intimidation. 3 generations of money were etched into its marble floors. Every chandelier, every oil painting, every inch of imported stone announced permanence. And apparently, so did she. Camille stood across the room, perfectly positioned near the fireplace, as if she belonged there by design. She wore a pale silk dress that caught the light at every movement, her hand resting casually on my husband Daniel's arm. Not gripping, not claiming, just enough contact to remind anyone watching that she had access. I noticed people noticed. "She's stunning," someone murmured beside me, not quietly enough. Camille smiled as though she'd heard it 1,000 times and enjoyed every repetition. When her eyes finally found me, the smile sharpened, not cruelly, but intentionally, like a blade tested against skin. "Oh," she said, tilting her head. "I don't think we've met properly." The room subtly stilled. Conversations paused. Forks hovered midair. She crossed the space between us with unhurried confidence and extended her hand. Not to shake, but to present herself. "I'm Camille," she said. "Daniel's friend. Not mistress. Not affair. Not the woman he rented an apartment for across town. Friend." I took her hand because refusing would have been louder. "I'm his wife," I replied calmly. Something flickered in her eyes, a quick flash of irritation, before the smile returned, brighter. "Yes," she said. "Of course. Everyone's told me. Everyone. Oh, darling," she added, her gaze dipping to my dress. "You must be freezing. Don't they warn guests how drafty this place is?" A laugh followed. Soft. Encouraging. Approved. I felt heat creep up my neck, but I did not move. I had learned long ago that reacting gave people permission. Daniel shifted beside her, finally remembering to look uncomfortable. "Camille." "It's fine," she said lightly, cutting him off. "I was just making conversation." Conversation. I sipped my wine. The glass trembled ever so slightly. Not from fear, from restraint. The party continued, but the rules had changed. Camille had marked me. From that moment on, every comment was carefully sharpened to land just close enough to wound. "So how long have you been living here?" she asked later, loud enough for the cluster of relatives nearby to hear. 10 years, I answered. She widened her eyes theatrically. "Really? Wow. You must know this house so well." "I do." "That's wonderful," she said sweetly. "It must be comforting to feel at home in a place like this, even temporarily." There it was. The implication, laid neatly between syllables. Temporary. I met her gaze. "Comfort doesn't come from houses," I said. "It comes from stability." Her smile tightened. Daniel stared into his drink. No one intervened. Family loyalty, I had learned, was selective. As the evening wore on, my presence became less inconvenient and more entertaining. Cousins who had never visited before asked pointed questions. An aunt I barely knew inquired whether I planned to stay in the area much longer. Someone joked, too loudly, that transitions were always messy but necessary. Camille accepted each of these comments like applause. At one point, she leaned in close, her voice low enough that only I could hear. You know, she said, I admire women who know when to step aside. I exhaled slowly. And I admire women who don't mistake access for ownership. She laughed softly. Oh, honey, ownership is just paperwork. Behind her, the double doors to the study opened quietly. No one noticed at first, not even Camille, lost in her sense of victory. But I did, because the man who stepped into the room moved differently than the others. Where the guests filled space, he commanded. His spine was straight, his movements economical, his presence unannounced but unmistakable. My father-in-law, Alessandro De Luca. The room adjusted itself instinctively. Conversation stopped. People turned. Alessandro surveyed the scene with a patient, knowing expression. The look of a man who had waited long enough to let foolishness reveal itself fully. His eyes moved from Camille's hand on Daniel's arm to my untouched seat to the wine glass still in my hand. Then he smiled. It wasn't warm. Isabella, he said, addressing me for the first time that evening. Why are you standing? The question landed like a drop plate. I opened my mouth to answer, but Camille spoke first. Oh, Mr. De Luca, she said brightly. We were just chatting. I'm afraid seating filled up. Alessandro raised one hand. Silence obeyed. He crossed the room slowly and pulled out the high-back chair at the head of the table, the one no one ever sat in unless he offered it. He set it slightly aside. For my daughter-in-law, he said calmly. Please. Every eye turned. Every breath held. Camille's smile faltered. Daniel went pale. And something in the room, something old and foundational, shifted. Alessandro did not sit. Instead, he turned back to the guests and spoke with quiet authority. I think, he said, it's time we clarified a few misunderstandings about this house. The mansion seemed to listen. The room breathed differently once Vanessa said his name. By Marcus. It wasn't loud, but it carried the way entitlement always does. Conversations dulled around us without stopping entirely, like background music turned down for an announcement no one wanted to miss. I felt eyes slide in my direction, not with concern, but curiosity. This was the part of the evening people attended for, the quiet spectacle of discomfort dressed up as civility. Marcus stood where she'd left him, glass in hand, posture relaxed in the way of men who had never been required to choose sides publicly. He didn't move toward us, didn't interrupt, just watched, his expression unreadable in a practiced, infuriating way. That told me everything I needed to know. I see, I said, my voice steady despite the pulse pounding just beneath my ears. Then congratulations. Vanessa blinked, clearly not expecting that response. For what? She asked. For being wanted, I replied. It's important to feel included. A few people nearby stiffened. Someone let out a small, uncomfortable laugh and then pretended to cough. Vanessa's smile sharpened. Not with anger, but interest. Oh, I like you, she said lightly. You're calmer than I expected. I've had practice. With disappointment, with reality. She circled closer, close enough that I could smell her perfume. Expensive, floral, unmistakably deliberate. She lowered her voice, though the clearing of space around us made privacy impossible. I don't want to embarrass you, she said. But this situation is awkward. For everyone. For whom, exactly? I asked. Well, she gestured vaguely. Your marriage is sort of common knowledge. Marcus shifted then, just slightly. A warning or a permission, I wasn't sure which. Common knowledge is often wrong, I said. She tilted her head. Is it? Because I've been told you and Marcus have an understanding. Slowly, deliberately, I turned to him. Do we? I asked. Silence. Marcus cleared his throat. This isn't the place. Then where is? I cut in before I could stop myself. Because it seems to keep happening everywhere else. Vanessa stepped back, hands raised in mock innocence. Hey, I don't want to cause a scene. Too late. My father-in-law's guests were highly skilled at pretending not to watch while absorbing every movement. This was theater, and Vanessa was enjoying the role she believed she'd earned. I just think, she continued smoothly, that sometimes it's kinder to know when to let go. There's dignity in that. Dignity, I echoed quietly. Yes, you've had years here. Comfort. Access. That's worth something. Access. I glanced around the room, suddenly aware of how little space I actually occupied. The way staff passed me without asking if I needed anything. The empty chair beside me at the small dining table. The way Marcus had stopped checking whether I arrived home safely months ago. Perhaps she was right. Perhaps I had been an accessory. But accessories could still speak. You're very confident for someone so temporary, I said. Vanessa's expression tightened for the first time. Excuse me. This party. I gestured around us. This house. None of it lasts if it isn't rooted somewhere. Confidence built on borrowed ground has a way of collapsing. A beat. Then she laughed, louder than before. Oh, sweetheart. This ground is very solid. Behind her, Marcus finally stepped forward. Isabella, enough. The sound of my name from his mouth startled me. Not because it held authority, but because it held distance. He spoke to me the way one speaks to a problem, not partner. I turned fully to him. Enough of what? I asked. Being disrespected? Or noticing? Vanessa threaded her arm through his, seamlessly reclaiming her position. Marcus, it's fine. I can handle it. That word handle landed like a slap. Around us, someone clinked a spoon against a glass, signaling dinner would be served soon. The crowd began to shift, murmurs rising, the tension dissipating just enough to feel unresolved. That's when Alessandro spoke. I said, my father-in-law repeated calmly, from the head of the room, why is my daughter-in-law standing? The effect was immediate. Vanessa's hand tightened on Marcus's arm. He went rigid. Alessandro De Luca did not raise his voice. He never had to. He was a man whose authority lived in expectation, not volume. He had built empires that outlived partnerships, survived markets, and erased people who mistook silence for weakness. He looked at Vanessa, then at Marcus, then at me. I don't see a chair, he continued mildly, but perhaps I'm mistaken. No, Marcus said quickly. I'll get. Alessandro lifted one finger. Stay. A server rushed forward, mortified, but Alessandro waved him away and pulled out the large carved chair at the table's center himself, the one directly opposite his. For Isabella, he said. The room froze. I hesitated, only for a moment, then stepped forward and sat. Vanessa's composure fractured, just slightly. Mr. De Luca, I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding. I was just. Or were you just? Alessandro asked pleasantly. She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Alessandro turned his gaze outward, addressing the room now. I hear a great many assumptions have been made tonight. About people, about status, about what belongs to whom. His eyes settled sharply on Marcus. That worries me. Marcus swallowed. Father, I do not recall, Alessandro continued, raising you to confuse access with ownership. A collective inhale swept the room. Vanessa's smile vanished entirely. Alessandro rested both hands on the back of a chair, leaning forward slightly. Perhaps this is a good moment to clarify something, he said, since there appears to be some confusion. He looked directly at Vanessa for the first time. This house, he said, enunciating each word, does not belong to my son. Silence thundered. Vanessa blinked. I'm sorry. It never has, Alessandro went on. Nor does it belong to whomever he entertains. Marcus turned pale. Father, that's not. It belongs to me, Alessandro finished calmly. And it always will. No one moved. No one breathed. Then he smiled, slow, controlled, merciless. And any future decisions regarding its legacy, he added, will take tonight's behavior fully into account. Vanessa's hand slid off Marcus's arm. I watched her carefully curated certainty crack, piece by piece. Because she hadn't just misjudged me. She had misjudged the foundation. The mansion revealed its true nature on the third night. By then, I understood its rules. Nothing here was accidental, and nothing stayed hidden for long. The house looked serene from the outside. A white stone estate perched above a manicured slope, its windows glowing amber after sunset, its gardens lit like something from an old European film. But inside, the air was thicker than etiquette allowed. Every hallway seemed to carry echoes. Every smile felt rehearsed. Every silence meant more than words. After the disastrous family party, that family party, I had barely slept. The humiliation replayed itself relentlessly. Celeste's laughter too loud, her hand resting possessively on my husband Adrian's forearm. The way she leaned toward me and said, with a smile sharpened like glass, "You should really appreciate where you're standing. Not everyone gets invited into this family." Invited. As though I were a guest in my own marriage. As though the baby growing inside me, our baby, was nothing but a temporary inconvenience. Adrian had said nothing. Not then. Not later. Not even when I locked myself in the guest bathroom and cried until my chest hurt. He'd followed me afterward, knocking once gently. "Don't make this into something it's not," he'd said. "Celeste gets carried away. She doesn't mean anything by it." That was when something inside me shifted. Because people don't expose themselves accidentally. They reveal themselves when they believe there will be no consequences. And in this house, everyone believed consequences were for someone else. The next morning, I found my father-in-law in the winter study. The winter study was my favorite room, though I suspected it frightened most people. Dark wood shelves climbed from floor to ceiling, crowded with books that had never been chosen for decoration. This was a room built for thought, not impression. The fireplace sat dormant, its stonework scarred with decades of use, and the windows overlooked the bare west garden where frost clung stubbornly to the hedges. Richard Hale sat behind the massive desk, reading glasses perched on his nose as he scanned legal documents, red pen in hand. He didn't look up when I entered. "Sit," he said calmly. "Not please, not dismissive, just decisive." I complied. The silence stretched comfortably, the kind that didn't demand performance. That alone felt like oxygen. "You were humiliated," he said finally, still reading. I straightened. "Yes." No embellishment. No apology. He looked at me now, eyes sharp and unsettlingly perceptive. "Good. Most people lie when they're embarrassed. You didn't." I wasn't sure how to respond. Richard leaned back slightly. "Do you know why Celeste behaves the way she does?" "She's confident," I said carefully. He snorted. "No," he said. "She's insecure." That surprised me. She attaches herself to powerful men because she doesn't know who she is without leverage, which makes her dangerous, but predictable. My fingers curled around the armrest. "Adrian allows it." "Yes," Richard said evenly. "And that is the more important issue." The words landed heavier than he likely intended. "Adrian," Richard continued, "has always mistaken comfort for loyalty and presence for love. He believes if nothing changes, nothing needs fixing." I swallowed. "Then why did you invite me here?" This time, Richard smiled, but not kindly. "Because," he said, "you don't belong to this house as a guest." My breath caught. Before I could ask what he meant, the study door opened. Celeste walked in without knocking. She wore silk pajama pants and one of Adrian's shirts, casually unbuttoned, as though daring the world to comment. "Oh," she said lightly, "I didn't realize this was a private meeting." Richard didn't even glance at her. "It is," he replied. "And you're interrupting?" Celeste laughed, but it faltered when he finally looked at her. "I suggest," Richard continued, voice cool as granite, "that you remember where you're standing." The irony was surgical. Celeste stiffened. "Of course. I was just looking for Adrian. He's not here." She hesitated, then glanced at me, just long enough for her contempt to flicker. "I'll come back later," she muttered. "Don't," Richard said. The single word froze her. "This house has rules," he went on. "One of them is that we do not indulge disrespect under my roof. You crossed that line last night." Celeste laughed again, brittle now. "Oh, Richard, surely you don't mean—" "I do," he said calmly. She stared at him, then at me, then back again. "This is still my family," she said defensively. Richard rose. Slowly. Deliberately. "No," he said. "You are tolerated by this family. That is not the same thing." The silence that followed was absolute. Celeste's face flushed, then paled. She opened her mouth, then closed it. I think, Richard finished, you should pack your things. Her eyes widened. You can't be serious. I am. She turned to me suddenly. This is because of you. Richard's voice cut through sharply. No, this is because of me. Celeste left without another word, heels striking the floor too loudly as she fled. When the door shut, I realized my hand was shaking. You didn't think this would be easy, Richard said quietly. No, I admitted, but I didn't expect this. Good, he said. Expectation is what blinds people. He sat back down. You need to understand something, he continued. That mansion you think you're trapped in? The one people whisper about. I nodded. That house belongs to me, he said. Not Adrian. Not Celeste. Not even the family trust. My heart began to pound. It is not a marital asset. It is not collateral. It is not leverage anyone but me can wield. He fixed me with a level stare. And I don't favor bullies. I exhaled, slow and careful. Then why haven't you said this before? Because, he said, truth has impact only when the listener is finally ready to hear it. I left the study shaken, but clearer than I'd been since arriving. The walls had ears. The house had a memory. And for the first time, I knew something everyone else didn't. Power had never been where Celeste thought it was. The party reached its most dangerous point when everyone finally sat down. That was when truths stopped hiding behind polite movement and started colliding across a single, shared table. The dining room of the mansion had always intimidated me. 22 seats, carved mahogany, chandeliers crystal cut so precisely they fractured light into hard, judgmental angles. This wasn't a room designed for warmth. It was designed for legacy, for decisions that outlived the people who made them. And tonight, every seat was filled. Relatives I barely knew leaned toward one another, whispering. Business partners of my father-in-law sat with relaxed confidence. Old friends watched everything with the detached amusement of people who believed none of this could touch them. Across from me sat Lydia, my husband's mistress. She wore red deliberately, a shade too bold for family, a dress too intimate for a dining room that had hosted marriages, funerals, and board-level negotiations. She met my eyes openly now, no longer pretending restraint. Her smile was slow, satisfied. She had won, she thought. My husband, Evan, sat beside her rather than beside me. That arrangement alone felt like a sentence. He didn't touch her, didn't look at me, didn't look at anyone. His posture was stiff, his expression hollow. He had learned too late that silence is not neutrality. It is a confession waiting to be interpreted. At the head of the table sat my father-in-law, Victor Hale, 82 years old, spine straight as the chair behind him. His presence anchored the room more than the walls did. He watched everyone with eyes sharpened by decades of controlling rooms just like this one. Dinner was served. The first course passed untouched. Polite conversation fluttered and died repeatedly. Lydia laughed too loudly, interrupting more than once. Each interruption was deliberate, a small act of dominance. She spoke about change, about how things evolve, about how old structures crumble. She looked directly at me when she said it. Christine, she said sweetly, twisting her wine glass, you must admit, it's beautiful that families can grow in unexpected ways. The table went quiet. My pulse didn't race. It settled. There is a moment before destruction when everything becomes calm. I recognized it immediately. I think, I replied evenly, families grow best when honesty isn't treated like an inconvenience. Victor's fork paused midair. Lydia laughed. Oh, honesty? Then let's be honest. You wouldn't still be here if Evan hadn't been merciful. Evan stiffened. Lydia, she cut him off. No, you said I could speak freely tonight. Her eyes never left mine. Christine stayed because she had nowhere else to go. That's not loyalty. That's fear. Something shifted. Victor placed his fork down slowly. No one noticed except me. I saw the exact second he reached a conclusion. Careful, Lydia, Victor said, his voice quiet and impossibly calm. This table has a long memory. She smiled indulgently. Of course it does. That's what makes it exciting to imagine new ownership. Several heads lifted. I heard the word echo. Ownership. as if it had physical weight. Evan finally looked at his father. "Dad, maybe this isn't the time." Victor raised one finger. Silence fell so completely it felt staged. "Actually," Victor said, "this is precisely the time." He leaned back, surveying us, not as family but as assets, as variables. I had planned to make this announcement after dessert, but given the enthusiasm in the room, perhaps now is better. Lydia's smile widened. She clasped her hands together, triumphant anticipation lighting her face. Victor continued, "As many of you know, this mansion has been in the Hale family for over a century. Generations lived here, died here, built their futures from decisions made at this table." He paused, letting the weight settle. "For the last 15 years, I have watched people behave as though longevity grants entitlement." His gaze slid, briefly, toward Lydia, then back to the center. "For that reason, 6 months ago, I initiated a full legal restructuring of the estate." A murmur rippled down the table. Evan's face drained of color. Lydia leaned forward. "Victor, that's incredible. Progressive, even." Victor ignored her. "The mansion," he said, "the surrounding properties, and the Hale Trust that maintains them." He turned his head toward me. "Were transferred out of my son's assumed future control." Lydia blinked. Just once. Evan's chair scraped loudly against the floor as he shifted. Victor folded his hands. They are no longer part of Evan's inheritance. The silence that followed was not shock. It was fracture. Lydia laughed, sharp and brittle. "That's dramatic, but obviously ownership still stays in the family." Victor looked at her for the first time fully. "Yes," he agreed. "It does." Then he turned back to me. "And that family member, by legal definition alone, is Christine." Lydia froze. Every eye in the room snapped toward me. I did not move. I did not speak. I did not smile. Because power does not rush. "The decision was finalized," Victor continued, "after observing who showed respect to this house and who treated it as a prize to be taken." Lydia stood abruptly. "That's not possible. She's nothing." Victor's voice hardened. "Sit." She did not. "That woman," Lydia continued, pointing at me now openly, "was tolerated, not chosen. She has no claim." Victor's gaze never left mine when he replied. "She has every claim." Evan whispered, "Christine," but the sound meant nothing now. Victor concluded softly, "This house remembers who was loyal when there was nothing to gain." Lydia's confidence collapsed in stages. First denial, then panic. Because she finally understood. She had never been standing inside the mansion. She had only been visiting. The explosion didn't come in the form of shouting. That would have been too crude for this family. Instead, it arrived as denial wrapped in decorum, as outrage strained through polite posture, as people recalculated their positions in near silence. Wealthy rooms do not erupt, they recalibrate. Lydia was the first to break. "This is insane," she said, voice shaking now despite her efforts. "You can't just decide something like that on a whim." Victor did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. "I can," he said calmly, "when it is my property and my intent." Evan finally pushed his chair back and stood. "Father, please. You're embarrassing people." Victor's gaze sharpened. "I am clarifying things. Embarrassment comes later when denial collapses." The quiet cruelty of that sentence sliced deeper than shouting ever could. Lydia turned to Evan, desperation bleeding through her composure. Tell him, this isn't what you agreed would happen." "Agreed." The word hung there, heavy, implicating. Every guest leaned in just slightly, hungry now. The entertainment had found its teeth. Evan opened his mouth, closed it. I watched my husband, still my husband, technically, struggle with the reality that no version of speech would save him. Allyship to Lydia cost him his standing. Disavowing her cost him his pride. Silence, once again, was his instinct. Victor noticed. "A lesson for everyone here," he said lightly, addressing the table. "Silence is often mistaken for neutrality. It rarely is." He turned to Evan. "You allowed a guest to demean your wife in this house." Lydia interrupted sharply. "I was not a guest." Victor's eyes cut to her. "You are now." The room exhaled as one. Lydia's hands trembled. Her power, which had always depended on proximity, evaporated the moment proximity lost meaning. "You're choosing her," Lydia snapped. "After everything Victor held up a hand. "We are not dramatizing adultery at my table." Her mouth fell open. "Christine," he said, turning back to me, "would you please stand?" I did. The floor felt steadier than it ever had. "I want everyone here to understand something," Victor continued. "This decision was not made because of tonight. Tonight merely confirmed it." He gestured around the room. "Loyalty that survives comfort is easy. Loyalty that survives discomfort is rare." His gaze met mine. Christine stayed without leverage, without protection, without promises. Lydia scoffed weakly. She stayed because she had no choice. Victor nodded. "Exactly." The word landed harder than any insult. "She stayed," he continued, "while others treated permanence as something to be won rather than gained." He paused. "That is who this house belongs to." I felt eyes on me, some impressed, some resentful, some calculating. No one spoke. Then Lydia laughed, brittle and frantic. "You think this ends anything?" she demanded. "This doesn't erase what he chose." She jabbed a finger toward Evan. Victor didn't flinch. "No," he said, "but it removes your ability to profit from it." That was when Lydia broke. She turned on Evan, fury raw now. "You promised me security." The word cracked. Security. The irony nearly made me laugh. Evan finally found his voice. "Lower your voice. You don't get to tell me what to do anymore," she snapped. "Not after this." She grabbed her clutch and stormed toward the exit, heels striking marble far louder than etiquette allowed. No one followed her. No one defended her. She left exactly the way she had entered this family's orbit, alone and mistaken. The door shut. The silence afterward felt permanent. Victor sat down. "Dinner," he said calmly, "is still being served." No one had the appetite, but plates were filled anyway. I ate slowly. Evan did not. When guests began to excuse themselves, offering stiff congratulations and awkward reassurances, I accepted them with grace, but not warmth. People saw differently now. They always did, once power clarified itself. Later that night, Evan found me on the back terrace. The gardens were dark, illuminated only by subtle ground lighting along stone paths. He stood behind me for a long moment before speaking. "You humiliated me." I didn't turn. "No," I said. "That happened long before tonight." "This wasn't your doing," he insisted. "You manipulated him." I finally faced him. "I endured you," I said quietly. "There's a difference." His jaw tightened. "You don't get to rewrite history." "I don't need to," I replied. "Your father already did." "For God's sake, Christine, you knew he was traditional." "Yes," I said, "and he rewarded behavior that aligned with his values." My calm made him angrier than shouting could have. "So what now?" he demanded. I tilted my head, considering him. "Now," I said, "you decide whether you want to remain married to the woman who now legally owns the house you live in." His face drained of color. "This isn't a threat," I added. "It's reality. You'd throw me out?" His tone was incredulous. "I would honor the house." He stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. I realized then that he had never been afraid of losing me, only of losing what surrounded me. I turned back toward the garden. "You have a guest room," I said. "For now." He didn't argue, because for the first time, he didn't have leverage either. Inside the house, Victor watched from the French doors. He didn't interfere. He didn't need to. The mansion had spoken, and tonight it had chosen. Morning in the mansion arrived without apology. Sunlight poured through the tall, east-facing windows, illuminating dust motes that had drifted undisturbed overnight, as if the house itself had been awake, watching consequences take shape. I stood alone in the breakfast room, fingers wrapped around a porcelain cup I hadn't touched. The quiet was deeper than usual, less hospitality, more vigilance. This house had drawn a line. Evan had not come down for breakfast. That omission spoke louder than any argument we might have had. He was weighing his options upstairs, calculating exits, measuring what he could still claim as familiar. For years, he had mistaken access for ownership. Now, that misunderstanding was costing him gravity. Victor entered without ceremony, dressed simply, no entourage, no staff hovering in anticipation. He looked older in the morning light, but sharper too, unburdened, as though a long-delayed decision had finally released him from restraint. "You slept?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "Better than I expected." He nodded. "That will happen more often now." He poured himself coffee and took a seat across from me. Between us sat the table, walnut, scarred, unmovable. It had been there for decades. It had carried deals, disappointments, reconciliations that weren't really reconciliations. It carried this moment too. "I owe you an explanation," Victor said. I met his eyes. "You owe me nothing." He tilted his head. "You're wrong. Clarity deserves context." He reached into his jacket pocket and slid a thin folder across the table. "Not dramatic, not theatrical. 6 months ago," he continued, "I began restructuring my estate not because of Evan, but because of pattern recognition. I noticed who spoke about legacy and who acted within it." I opened the folder carefully. Deeds, trust documents, dates, initials, legal precision. "My son," Victor said evenly, "has always struggled with accountability. He builds relationships as extensions, tools to reinforce his self-image. You were never meant to be challenged by that role." I looked down at the paper again. "And Lydia?" Victor's mouth flattened. She hovered where she believed power would eventually consolidate. "Did she ever have a claim?" I asked. "No," he said immediately. "But she believed presentation would outrun substance." I closed the folder. My hands were steady. "Why not tell me?" I asked. "Why let her humiliate me?" Victor's gaze didn't falter. "Because," he said, "true entitlement reveals itself when it believes it has immunity. I needed to know how she would behave when she thought you were defenseless." My chest tightened, but not with hurt, with something sharper. "And Evan?" I asked. Victor exhaled slowly. I hoped he would interrupt. That silence, the one Evan chose, echoed again. Victor rose. He failed. Footsteps echoed from the hall. Evan appeared in the doorway, drawn by instinct or dread. He looked as if he hadn't slept, shirt wrinkled, jaw unshaven, posture uncertain. For the first time in years, he looked like a guest. "We need to talk," he said. Victor stood immediately. "We already have." Evan looked between us. "Not alone." Victor gestured toward the chair Evan had once assumed was his by default. "Sit then." Evan hesitated, then sat. "This isn't fair," Evan said, hands clenched. "You're punishing me publicly to make a point." Victor's voice was calm, taut. "I am preserving boundaries to make one." "To her," Evan snapped, pointing at me. "You're handing her everything." Victor leaned forward. "Correction. I am acknowledging what she already embodied." Evan turned to me. "You wanted this. Don't pretend you didn't." I held his gaze without blinking. "I wanted respect. This is just the cost of its absence." He laughed, bitter now. "You sat there while father destroyed my reputation." "No," I said quietly. "I sat there while you did." Silence stretched. Victor spoke again. "This is the last conversation we will have under this roof as a family." Evan stiffened. "What does that mean?" "It means," Victor continued, "you will vacate the East Wing by the end of the week. Financial support will continue in accordance with the prenuptial agreement. Nothing more." Evan's eyes widened. "You're disowning me?" "No," Victor said. "I'm refusing to shield you." The line was final. Evan stood abruptly, chair scraping harshly against the floor. "You're siding with her over your own son." Victor's response was quiet. "I'm siding with integrity over indulgence." Evan left without another word. The house absorbed his departure without tremor. Later that day, Lydia returned. She did not knock. She entered in sunglasses and anger, heels sharp against stone, face tight with fury she no longer bothered to mask. "This is insane," she said, pulling the glasses off. "You think you've won something?" Victor did not rise. "You are trespassing." Her laugh was shrill. "Don't flatter her. This doesn't make her powerful." I stood. "No," I said, voice steady. "It makes me rooted." Lydia's eyes flicked to me. "Hatred bear now? You're nothing without him." Victor stood then, fully, finally uncontained. "She is the woman who remained when nothing was promised," he said. "That makes her everything this house requires." Security entered then, not aggressively, just present. "Escort Ms. Lydia off the property," Victor said calmly, and ensure she understands she is not welcome again. Lydia stared at me as they approached. This ends in court, she hissed. Victor smiled faintly. It already has. She left screaming accusations the gates absorbed without echo. When quiet returned, Victor turned to me. Are you prepared for what comes next? Yes, I said. He nodded once. Good, he replied. Because from now on, no one confuses guests with foundations. The house stood in agreement. Power never announces its invoice up front. It waits until you've stepped fully into position, until retreat is impossible, then sends the bill quietly in legal stationery and polite threats. The first letter arrived 3 days after Lydia was escorted off the property. It was cream-colored, heavyweight paper, the kind designed to signal seriousness without aggression. The sender was a law firm I recognized instantly. Old money, older tactics. Victor read it once, folded it neatly, and placed it beside his plate as if it were nothing more than an advertisement. She's alleging emotional distress, he said mildly. Defamation, wrongful exclusion. I almost laughed. On whose authority? I asked. None that matters, he replied. But this is her opening move. Evan's letter came next. That one hurt more, not because it surprised me, but because it confirmed something I'd avoided naming. He wasn't asking reconciliation. He was demanding terms. We can resolve this discreetly, it read. Public conflict helps no one. Victor handed it back without comment. Do you want me to respond? He asked. No, I said. Let him feel the quiet. The quiet did not last long. Within a week, headlines began to mutate. Not outright lies. Those would have been actionable, but suggestions. Carefully sourced whispers. Anonymous tips. Sources claim family tensions surrounding estate control. Questions raised about influence of longtime spouse. Allegations of manipulation behind trust restructuring. Victor read them without reaction. Expectation, he said, is always resistance. Meetings followed. Attorneys arrived with binders thick enough to injure. Advisors asked if I was prepared for public scrutiny, if I understood what it meant to own something powerful. Yes, I said. It means visibility. What they didn't ask, but should have, was whether I was prepared for betrayal to keep coming dressed as negotiation. Evan requested mediation. Victor refused on my behalf. This is no longer a marital issue, he said. It is a governance failure. Evan's legal team escalated. They argued implied entitlement, length of marriage, future expectation, emotional damages incurred by sudden displacement. Victor's response was surgical. He occupied property, his attorney stated calmly, at the pleasure of the owner. That pleasure has expired. When Lydia's suit was formally filed, Victor only sighed. She misunderstands how courts view trespass, he said. I remained silent through all of it. There's a point where restraint becomes strategy. One evening, after hours of document review, Victor poured 2 glasses of scotch and handed me one. You're handling this well, he said. I learned from watching people who didn't, I replied. He smiled faintly. That weekend, Evan showed up unannounced. Security reported him before he reached the steps. Victor allowed him entry. Evan looked thinner. Desperate bleaches dignity quickly. We need to talk, he said. We already have, I replied, standing. This isn't about money, he insisted. This is about fairness. Victor's gaze sharpened instantly. No, he said. It's about consequences. Evan turned to me. You didn't used to be like this. No, I agreed. I used to tolerate you. That landed harder than anything Victor could have said. He exhaled roughly. You're enjoying this. I'm enduring it, I corrected. There's a difference. He stepped closer. You've turned my father against me. Victor stood. You turned yourself away, he said. I simply stopped intervening. Evan looked around the room, the weight of the house finally pressing in. I belong here, he said quietly. Victor answered without hesitation. Belonging, he said, is proven when no one is watching. Security escorted Evan out without resistance. The lawsuit collapsed 2 weeks later. Lydia's attorneys withdrew, quietly, professionally, after discovery exposed timelines that contradicted her claims. Settled, undisclosed, irrelevant. Evan's challenge followed shortly after. Judges, Victor reminded me, dislike entitlement disguised as injury. The house returned to quiet. But change doesn't disappear, it consolidates. Social invitations stopped arriving addressed to both of us. They came to me instead. People recalibrated. Victor noticed. You don't owe them performance, he told me. Presence is enough. One afternoon, we walked the grounds together as autumn crept in. This estate will outlive both of us, he said suddenly. Legacy isn't about possession. It's about continuity. I nodded. And you? He asked. What do you want? The question startled me. I want peace, I said. And I want the truth to remain intact. He smiled. Then you'll do well here. Because the cost of power isn't cruelty. It's permanence. The paperwork was heavier than I expected. Not physically, though there were stacks of it, but in the way each signature shifted gravity. Ink mattered here. Dates mattered. Every page carried decades of precedent, assumptions, and carefully protected influence. Victor insisted I read every document myself. Power handed over without comprehension, he said, is just abandonment in disguise. So I read. I learned the mansion was only the visible part. Surrounding parcels of land, holding structures, quiet agreements that kept certain doors open and others permanently shut. The estate was not merely a residence. It was an engine. And Victor had run it with disciplined restraint, trusting few, forgiving none who mistook discretion for weakness. This transfer, the attorney explained, does not isolate you. It clarifies authority. Good, I thought. Clarity had become my currency. The signing took place in the East Study, the same room where Lydia had first been corrected. For witnesses, 2 attorneys. Victor at the head of the table, posture composed. When I finished signing the final page, Victor closed the folder himself. It's done, he said. Silence followed. Not celebratory, not tense. Simply complete. News did not break immediately. Victor delayed the announcement by design. Let the aftershocks settle first, he said. People reveal themselves in delay. They did. Some arrived with sudden concern. Messages cloaked as check-ins. Praise disguised as nostalgia. Invitations resurrected from years of neglect. I acknowledged none of it beyond courteous receipt. Others came with calculations. A cousin proposed partnerships that hadn't existed before. A distant aunt hinted at restoring harmony. Victor watched all of it with faint amusement. They're adjusting their posture, he noted. And Evan? I asked. Victor paused. He's adjusting his story. That proved accurate. Evan reached out one final time, not through lawyers, not through accusations, but through memory. He sent photographs from our early years. Trips, laughing moments, proof of happiness preserved for leverage. I did not respond, because history can be true without being relevant. The divorce finalized quietly. No press, no spectacle, just signatures returned and names restored to parallel independence. I kept the mansion. Evan kept his illusions, smaller, but intact enough to survive. No, he agreed. It never learned his weight. Winter arrived carefully. The mansion shifted with the season, windows sealed, fireplaces lit with practiced efficiency, staff moving like clockwork. I learned the rhythms quickly, not by command but by cooperation. Victor watched without interference. You don't need to ask permission here, he reminded me once. I know, I said. I'm learning stewardship, not conquest. That earned me a rare, approving nod. One evening, alone in the great hall, I stood beneath the main chandelier and let myself look up, not to admire it, but to measure the scale of permanence above me. The house no longer intimidated me, because I understood it. It was not something to be occupied. It was something to be upheld. Victor's health declined subtly, but unmistakably. Nothing dramatic, just fatigue, slower steps, longer rests. He refused any help beyond efficiency. Decline is not defeat, he said when I mentioned concern. It's transition. We finalized the remainder of his affairs over quiet lunches and long walks. Promise me one thing, he said once. Yes, that you will never confuse silence with peace. This house thrives on clarity. I won't, I assured him. He believed me. When the formal announcement finally came, a brief, precise legal notice confirming my full proprietorship. Reactions varied exactly as Victor predicted. Support arrived from unexpected directions. Resistance appeared from predictable ones. It did not matter. Because the center held, the mansion remained. And so did I. The night the truth finally settled into its rightful place, the mansion felt different. It wasn't anything visible at first. The chandeliers still cast their warm, golden light across polished marble floors. The walls still held generations of framed portraits, men and women in careful poses, guarding legacies with oil-painted eyes. Yet as I stood in the center of the grand living room, surrounded by people who had once diminished me, I understood something fundamental had shifted. Houses, I realized, remember. They remember who walked their halls with honesty and who passed through like thieves pretending permanence. My father-in-law stood near the fireplace, his posture straight despite the years pressing into his shoulders. In his hand was a leather-bound folder, worn, familiar, and final. The murmurs around us had not yet fully subsided after his revelation, but no one interrupted him now. Not Lydia, not Richard, not even the relatives who had laughed quietly while I stood humiliated just an hour earlier. Everything you assumed, he said calmly, was convenient for you. Lydia's face was pale beneath her flawless makeup. The woman who had smirked at me over champagne, who had leaned close and whispered you don't belong here, now looked as though the room had turned on her. And in a way it had. Richard stood beside her, stiff, utterly shattered by the knowledge that the wealth he believed himself entitled to was never his. His eyes avoided mine, not out of guilt but shock. The documents were already being passed around. Deeds, trust papers, amendments made years ago, long before my marriage, long before Lydia had even entered their lives. The mansion, this sprawling estate that symbolized power, had never legally belonged to Richard. It belonged to my father-in-law, and now to me. I watched. My father-in-law continued quietly, "How you treated my daughter-in-law." He turned toward me, his voice gentler but no less firm. I watched how dignity survived without cruelty, how silence carried strength. And I decided that legacy should go not to blood alone, but to character. I felt the air leave my lungs. Lydia laughed once, sharp and brittle. "This is absurd. You can't just hand everything to her." My father-in-law didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "The absurdity," he said, "is thinking ownership comes from proximity to power rather than responsibility." Security appeared at the edge of the room, at his signal, not hers. When Richard stepped forward, reaching for his father's arm, the man shook his head. "You were never deprived, Richard. You were simply exposed." Silence followed, the deep, echoing kind that leaves no space for denial. Lydia left first. She didn't look back. Richard followed, slower, his shoulders curved inward, as though the mansion itself were rejecting him. When the doors closed behind them, I felt something loosen inside me, an ache I hadn't known how to name. Later, when the guests were gone and the echoes of false laughter had fully faded, I stood alone on the balcony overlooking the gardens. Wind slipped through the hedges. Somewhere in the distance, a fountain murmured. "You don't have to live here," my father-in-law said quietly from behind me. "Ownership doesn't mean obligation." I turned to him. "I know," and I did. For the first time since I had married into this family, I knew exactly who I was, without apology, without explanation. The mansion was never the prize. It was the proof. Proof that endurance matters, that silence does not equal weakness, that cruelty eventually exposes itself. Weeks later, I moved out. I kept the house in trust, restored parts of it, opened sections for community programs and heritage preservation. The place transformed, not into something louder, but something truer. As for Lydia and Richard, they faded into stories people told in lowered voices, those who thought power was borrowed forever. And me? I learned this. You don't need to shout to reclaim your place. You only need the truth and the patience to let it arrive. The house remembered, and this time, it remembered me. Legacy is not inherited the way money is. It is not handed down through last names or secured by proximity to power. Legacy survives only where responsibility lives quietly, long after the audience leaves. I understood that fully the day I locked the mansion's front doors for the last time, not with anger or victory, but with certainty. The house no longer needed me inside it. It needed me to protect what it stood for. I did not stay because ownership does not require occupation. I hired caretakers who respected history, archivists who understood purpose, and stewards who knew that preservation is not nostalgia, is discipline. The mansion became calmer after that, as if relieved to no longer be mistaken for a trophy. People adjusted. They always do. Those who once ignored me learned to speak carefully. Those who once measured me softened their tone. Respect did not arrive as apology, but as hesitation. And hesitation is its own confession that, as for my ex-husband, his world became smaller, not dramatically, not tragically, but truthfully. Without borrowed ground beneath his feet, he was forced to stand on his own character. I did not watch. I did not need to. Reality does its work regardless of witnesses. My father-in-law passed quietly the following spring. At the service, there were no grand speeches, only gratitude, spoken simply. He left this world the same way he ran his affairs. Clean lines, settled accounts, no illusions. I honored him by continuing exactly what he taught me. Clarity over comfort, integrity over inclusion, truth over performance. Years later, when people ask how it felt to be humiliated publicly only to rise above it, I give them an answer that disappoints them. I didn't rise, I say. I stay grounded. Because power does not come from winning a room. It comes from knowing who you are when the room turns against you, and not reconsidering yourself. The mistress wanted a mansion. My ex-husband wanted entitlement. I wanted stability. Only one of those endures. And that is how the house and my life finally became silent in the best possible